Hello and welcome to Reasonable Data Science, the channel devoted to teaching a reasonable amount of data science in a reasonable amount of time. This video will show you how to set up a JupyterLite notebook so you can start using Python for data science. If you have never heard of a JupyterLite notebook, you might be wondering how this differs from the super popular Jupyter notebook that's used by lots of data scientists. Well, JupyterLite is the web version of the Jupyter Notebook, and the advantage of using JupyterLite is that it requires no downloading of software. All you need is a web browser and some data to begin. The first step in setting up a JupyterLite notebook is to navigate to the JupyterLite website. And so I've posted this link in the video description below. So after you've navigated to the website, if you scroll down to the section called Using JupyterLite, and then go down to this link here and click on it, that'll then open up a new page where it should show a couple of sections here. The section we're going to click on is in the notebook section at the top right here, and we're going to click on this purple Python icon. Before jumping into coding, I wanted to point out and go through some of the features that JupyterLite offers. So when you first enter your JupyterLite environment here, you'll notice on the left-hand side there's this pane. And what this pane shows is the name of the workbook that we're currently using, which is untitled. And then it'll also list all the data sets that you've imported into Jupyter. So the first thing that I usually like to do is I like to rename my tab to something more meaningful. So I'm just going to right click over here in the left-hand pane and then click rename. And I'm just going to call this test workbook. And then just click the enter button on your keyboard. And you noticed after we've renamed it here, it also gets renamed at the top up here. So the nice thing about renaming your file or giving it a meaningful name is that you can click the save button here. And so if you were to exit JupyterLite and come back in later, you would be able to load this code, your code script here again, because you've saved it, which is very handy for being a web-based software. The next thing that I like to do is I like to come up here to the settings and choose a theme. And so each of you may choose a different theme than me, but it's up to you. And so right now, the theme that you see is the light theme. It has a white background everywhere. If we were to go and change it to Jupyter Lab Nighttime, you'll see the theme changes to the dark workbook here. So some of you might like the dark one better than the light one, just based on your preference. I'm going to change it back to the light just because I think it's a little bit easier to see for this video. All right, so after we've set up our Jupyter notebook here by renaming the tab we're working on and then using the theme, the next thing I wanted to point out is in the middle here. The middle section here is where we're going to be writing all of our code when we analyze our data. So this is what's called the code editor. And so you'll see at first there's a blank box here. If you were to click your cursor into the box, and then notice here, it says the word code. Well, this cell is in code editor mode. And so when you're in code editor mode, that allows you to write code and execute it. There's a couple of different options you can choose though, other than code editor mode. So one other popular one you'll want to use is called Markdown. So if you click the drop-down menu, then choose Markdown. What this does is it turns that cell from a code editor cell to a Markdown cell, and that allows you to write text. So maybe you want to write or create titles or section headers in your code to make it a little bit more organized and a little bit easier. Using Markdown cells is exactly how you would accomplish that. And so a fun fact about Markdown cells is that when you type a hashtag, and then let's say you want to give your workbook a title. So we're going to call this test workbook. And then you click the little play button here. That'll add your title or your Markdown cell. That'll execute that. The fun fact about a markdown cell is that the more hashtags you put in the cell, the smaller the font size gets. So you can see here our test workbook is now going to be a lot smaller because I did 3 hashtags compared to 1 hashtag here. And so you probably noticed this, but the way to execute any sort of markdown or code cell in Python is you put your cursor in the box and then you click play. And so that's the best way to execute it. You could also do Control Enter on your keyboard or Control Shift Enter depending on the settings that you want. All right, so we've added a title here using the markdown cell. I added this as an example, but I don't really want it anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click my cursor into that cell. I'm just going to click the trash can button here, and that'll get rid of it. And so let's say that we have a bunch of code blocks here, or we want to add a bunch more code blocks. What we do is just click this little plus button here and just keep adding code cells. And so as your code grows, you're going to definitely want to add more and more code blocks or blocks to your code script here. But let's say that this title, we accidentally put it in the wrong place. You want it now a little bit lower in your workbook. Well, all we have to do is just click on it. And over here, you can just use these up and down arrows to move any sort of markdown or code cell within our workbook. So it makes it really handy and really easy to organize your code script. All right, so now that we've entered a title of our workbook here, I'm going to put one more markdown cell in here. I'm just going to do 2 hashtags, and I'm going to say packages to load. And I'm going to execute that. So this is just a section header I'm going to use, but it leads into what I'm going to cover next. So in Jupyter here, before you can start analyzing any data, you're always going to want to import what are called packages. Packages are things that you as the users have written that make Jupyter a lot easier to use and allow us as the user to then analyze data a lot easier than using traditional Python. So 2 of the most used packages in Jupyter will be pandas and numpy. And the way that you import packages is you type the word import, and then let's say you wanted to import the pandas package, you just say pandas. And then it's usually good, a good methodology to alias all of your packages. That way going forward, you can just refer to them as an easier alias versus typing out the whole package. So I'm going to say import pandas, and then we're going to say give it the alias PD. So that way going forward, we just refer to PD, and that'll allow us to use any of the functions within that pandas package. When I click on the enter button on my keyboard, you notice that it doesn't execute the code, but it instead brings it down to another line. So within Jupyter, if you just keep hitting enter, you see that your code block can have numerous rows of code in it. And so one code block could have tons and tons of lines of code in it, which might make it a bit easier for you to write, or maybe you want it, maybe you want one line of code in each code block. That's totally up to you. But for some things like loading packages, I personally like to put them all in one code block. So if we wanted to import the numpy package, I'm going to say import numpy as np right below the pandas here. And then again, I gave it the alias np. So going forward, whenever I want to use a function from the numpy package, I just say np. And so since I'm done writing the packages here, I'm just going to go up and execute this code block. And when I execute it, you'll notice there's a little star or asterisk next to the block. That means it's running or executing the code. And so let's look at that here. So you notice that asterisk right there. That means the code block is executing. When the number appears next to it, that means it's done executing the code. And for right now, you can ignore this deprecation warning. It just means that pandas is probably going to change in the future, and so they're just trying to alert you that that's going to change. But one thing that is handy is if you were to mess up on your code, you will get error warnings, And it's good to know how to navigate those error warnings because they are pretty cryptic. And so let's say that we accidentally misspelled a numpy and we just called it nump and we executed that. Well, we're going to get an error message here. And so you see the first bunch of lines here in our error really don't mean much to us. So basically, anytime in Jupyter you get an error, scroll all the way to the bottom of the error message. And this is where you're going to find the most relevant information. And so basically this says no module named nump exists, which that's correct. Our module should be numpy. So that lets us know that, yeah, we misspelled numpy and we called it nump. So we just come back up here, put a Y for numpy, rerun it, and that should eliminate that error message. All right, so now that we have our packages loaded into our Jupyter notebook, the next thing we're going to want to do is bring in our data source. And so for this video, I'm using the Titanic dataset that's found on Kaggle.com. I've also posted that link in the video description below. So feel free to download that and use that to follow along. Or you can upload any CSV file that you want to analyze. It's the same process. So how you bring the data into Jupyter is you navigate up to this little up arrow in the left-hand corner. When you click that, it'll then open up a sub window on your desktop, on your computer. And you'll just navigate to where you have stored your CSV file. Mine's stored in my personal drive under my downloads because I just downloaded it. And then you just click on your file and click open. And when you do that, you'll notice over here in the left-hand pane that your data set now has appeared in Jupyter. So then I named it Titanic data.csv. That's the name of my file that I downloaded from Kaggle.com. So although we've imported or loaded the data into our Jupyter notebook, we actually need to bring it into our code script. So just because it's in the left-hand pane over here does not mean that it's actually in our code script and we can start writing code to analyze it. So the way we import it into our code script is we use a function called read_CSV. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set an alias for this data set. That way going forward, whenever we want to refer to the data set, we're going to use the alias. So I'm just going to say df, which is the alias. We're going to set that equal to pd.read_CSV. And so the read.csv function is part of the pandas package pd, and so that's what we loaded up here. And so pd.reads_csv, and then in quotes, type exactly the name of the file that's over in the left-hand pane over there. And be careful because it is case specific, so you need to type it exactly how it shows over here, and also include that .csv on the end. And so after you've typed that and you click execute, you should see a number next to that code block. The last thing I like to do when I bring in a data set is I just like to quickly look at the data set to make sure it looks like it should. And so how you can do that is you can say df.head, and we're going to say 10. So we're going to look at the first 10 rows of the data set to make sure it looks okay. So we're just going to click the play button. And as you can see, it loaded the first 10 rows and it loaded all the columns that are in the data set. So far, it looks like the data set loaded everything correctly. All the items in the data set were loaded correctly. All right, well, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed learning how to set up your JupyterLite notebook. Again, it's completely web-based, and so it requires no downloading of software. And in my opinion, makes it a bit easier for beginners to get their feet wet, learning how to use Python and learning how to analyze data in Jupyter. And so if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button so you can look at my future content on the channel. And just remember that you can learn data science in a reasonable amount of time. Just keep on practicing.